I am so honored and excited to have Dr. Alexis David here with us to talk about weight loss and obesity. Let me introduce her really quick before I bring her on. Dr. David is an award-winning physician with dual board certification in family medicine and obesity medicine. Dr. David is also the creator of Your Metabolic Transformation, an online course and coaching program for busy people who struggle with metabolic syndrome and obesity. Hello, thank you for joining us.
Hi there. Thank you for having me.
Well, I just briefly described a little bit or gave a little description about your background and specializing in obesity and weight management. Can you tell us a little bit more about your practice and how the connection, how obesity is connected to mental health and illness?
Sure. Thank you for having me. In my practice, I have a small clinic in Bellevue, Washington, just outside of Seattle. And I meet and treat people one-on-one who struggle with the disease of obesity. Many people are not even aware that we consider excess weight or obesity as a medical condition that is actually recognized and deserves treatment. So first of all, I think we have to recognize that so many people believe that it's an inherent problem that they have to work on themselves and don't even realize that at some point, excess weight becomes a condition that does deserve its own treatment. And so that's what I work with every day. And there is a very common association with mental health conditions and excess weight or obesity. So when I use the term obesity, most commonly we link that with a higher BMI. And just to categorize the BMI categories, BMI is just one measure of our weight. Normal would be 20 to 25, 25 to 30 is considered overweight, and anything over BMI of 30 is considered in the category of obesity. But there's much more to it than that, where it's also about how much of your body is composed of muscle, water, and fat. So we also utilize body fat percentages. So I do utilize a body composition scale in my practice. And we also measure waist circumference, because somebody can have what would be considered a normal weight, a normal BMI, say of 24, but have very low muscle mass and higher abdominal weight or abdominal fat. And that we would call abdominal obesity or sarcopenic obesity, if somebody can be actually a normal BMI with low muscle mass. And there's often a lot of people that have high muscle mass and low amounts of body fat. So, in the category of 25 to 30, a lot of people who actively are doing, weightlifting and training and things like that. So we cannot only go by the BMI, but to make it easier to generalize, we typically utilize that. Most insurance companies utilize that. And that's currently how the diagnosis is coded in the United States. That being said, metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance are common underlying contributing factors and triggers for obesity. So catching this early is important. And so metabolic health, that's, the underlying processes of our metabolism, how our body, the physiology works. There are different signals and regulations. It's, our weight is tightly regulated, much like our blood pressure, our temperature, our heart rate. There's typically a normal range, but there can be variations outside of normal. And what a lot of people don't realize is that our weight also is highly regulated by what we call these autonomic nervous system, or our body's kind of just basic natural pathways of kind of running itself and taking care of itself. And so what we looking back is when we evolved, though, as a species, in early years, we didn't really have a threat to gaining too much weight. And if anything, our most common threat was losing too much weight. If we had to go through periods of, mostly we'd have feast or famine in like hunter-gatherer times. There's a lot of regulations to prevent us from losing too much weight. There's not that many regulations in check to prevent us from gaining too much weight, because that wasn't a threat to our survival. So those who survived were really good at storing extra weight for energy to use during periods of famine or fasting. And so what happens is, now fast forward to our current times, our environment has changed significantly. Our food sources have changed significantly, and our activity levels have changed significantly. We're not as active as we used to be. We don't have to hunt and find our food. In fact, right now, we don't even have to get up off the couch. If you want, you can just order it to be delivered to your home. And this is, especially in this era with the pandemic, is happening more than ever. And there's a cascade of different processes that occur with a disease of obesity. Going back to regulating our weight, when you can take in more energy than you use. So if we're not moving as much, we're staying up later. We're not naturally going to sleep when it's dark outside. We have all this blue light and electronic devices that we are staying up. We are having a lot of different stressors on our body and our mental health. And that can also influence, in our hunter-gatherer times, our main sources of stress was survival. And if there was a large animal going to chase us down, we typically would run. And so our fight or flight system has these signals to boost our energy, to increase our glucose. Now, when we're stressed, it's typically not a physical threat. We are typically not having to fight or flight, prepare to run or prepare to fight. And what happens is this chronic stress can lead to dysregulation. It can increase our cortisol levels, increase our blood sugars, and we have increased blood sugars. That increases our insulin levels, and increased insulin levels. Insulin's a hormone that signals to our body that we have excess energy and encourages us to store fat, among other things. So we commonly are seeing this in our current day environment. We have chronic stress. We're not moving as much as we ever used to. And also our nutrition sources are much more calorie dense without having nutritional value. We've generally, over time, are getting much less fiber and plant sources in, having much more processed foods. And the more processed a food is, the more inflammation it can contribute. So there's a lot of things there that I just mentioned that we can go into, but to suffice it to say, our current environment sets us up to be a society in general that carries extra weight. It's so much easier to gain weight. And in going back to the regulation of our weight, when we are taking in more energy than we're using, we're going to store that. So over 65% of American adults have overweight or obesity. And what we're seeing is these trends have increased in the last 30 years or so. In the most recent 10 years or so, what we're seeing is an increase in the rate of extreme obesity. So an increase in the rate of people with a BMI over 40. So the average adult in America has overweight or obesity. Our body, after we've been at a higher weight for a while, it gets used to being at that higher weight. So we think of it like a broken thermostat. If you have a broken thermostat, in the wintertime, we turn it up. It's cold outside. We want it to be warmer inside. But in the summer, when it gets warm outside and cold, we want it cold inside. We want to try to turn it down. What happens with our weight regulation is that we've lived so long at that higher weight or higher temperature. When we try to turn it down, it will eventually try to go back, because our body recognizes, and in how we evolved in hunter-gatherer times, that it recognizes losing too much weight or a certain amount of weight as a trigger to the other cascade of hormones that regulate our metabolism, how much energy we use and how efficient our muscles are, how much energy we feel in terms of being active. That's going to decrease. so that you're going to feel hungrier and you're going to feel more tired and fatigued and want to move around less. So that's why it's a setup nowadays for what we consider this yo-yo dieting pattern, where we want to go on a diet to lose weight. And we get to a certain point, and then all of a sudden it's really hard. And most people interpret that as a lack of willpower to be able to stick with their diet. I like to think of it as more of a lifestyle change and not a diet. And we try to focus on daily habits as our goals and try not to be too restrictive. So when we can try to make changes to our body that are in a more of a daily habit goal change, over time, it'll be much easier to lose. What happens with this metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance? So I liken, insulin resistance itself is a precursor to pre-diabetes, and pre-diabetes is a precursor to diabetes. Most people are aware that diabetes, type 2 diabetes, is a higher abnormal levels of blood sugars or glucose that's out of control. And there can be a significant increased risk in heart disease and neuropathy and a whole cascade of health risks associated from having diabetes alone. When I was early out of training 15 years ago, at the time, we were just learning to recognize pre-diabetes as a condition that needs to be treated as aggressively as diabetes. And now, it's not well recognized yet, but in my field, we recognize it. The disease of insulin resistance is a precursor to pre-diabetes, and we need to be aggressively addressing that. Insulin resistance, it's hard to detect with your routine screening blood work. You can have a normal glucose and have insulin resistance. What we like to do is we like to check a fasting insulin level that is done at the same time as your glucose. And we plug that into a calculation called the HOMA-IR, or the homeostatic model assessment of insulin resistance. And we can get a number. And if your number is over 2, then you have some level of insulin resistance. I see a lot of people, if you're already diagnosed with pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes, then you've had insulin resistance for a while. Pre-diabetes typically occurs about 5 to 10 years prior to the diagnosis of diabetes. Insulin resistance typically occurs for about 10 to 15 years prior to the diagnosis of pre-diabetes. The most important time to catch it is in this insulin resistant state, because that is when it is reversible and typically can be reversed with lifestyle changes. So I am actively, aggressively looking for insulin resistance to treat that, to help reverse and prevent the development of pre-diabetes or diabetes. But don't fret if you have pre-diabetes already or type 2 diabetes. We can still utilize our lifestyle changes and habit goals to help reverse your risk of disease and help to improve and perhaps even get you off of some medications. Metabolic syndrome is when you have pre-diabetes or diabetes, you have elevated fasting glucose, you have elevated triglycerides or low HDL cholesterol, elevated blood pressures, and an increased waist circumference. Your waist circumference, now the normal guidelines for that, for the majority of people, it does vary depending on your ethnic background. People of South Asian descent and Hispanic descent have a higher risk of metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance at a lower waist circumference. But if you're not in that ethnic category, for women, it's a waist circumference of 35 inches or higher, and for men of 40 inches or higher. If you do have that ethnic background of Hispanic or Asian descent, then it would be for women a waist circumference of 31 inches, and for men a waist circumference of 35 inches. So those are some things that you can check at home: increased weight and your waist circumference. All you need is a tape measure. Most routine fasting blood work can help you to screen for metabolic syndrome. If you get your fasting glucose and a cholesterol panel, and you have your blood pressure checked. Blood pressure over 135 or over 80, and triglycerides over 150, or an HDL that is under 40 for men or under 50 for women. Having out of those 5 different categories constitutes having metabolic syndrome. And having metabolic syndrome doubles your risk of cardiovascular disease. So having a heart attack or a stroke, and also if you don't already have diabetes, it also doubles your risk of having diabetes. And in general, somebody who has metabolic syndrome increases all-cause mortality by over 1.5 times. Another condition is fatty liver disease. And so you can see that in elevated liver function tests. But what I haven't yet talked about and would be, our link with our mental health. Having a mental health condition at some point in your life does increase your risk of having an elevated BMI by about 50%. So not everybody who has a mental health condition has obesity or metabolic syndrome, but it certainly does increase your risk of having that. A lot of people that struggle with anxiety or mood disorders or having a history of substance abuse do struggle with their weight. There's a lot of other issues that go along with, that having obesity can also contribute to having a worsening of, say, depression or anxiety or self-esteem and body image if you struggle with that. A lot of people, especially women, also struggle with their sexuality and have decreased sexual desire. They also have disturbances in their sleep and have disturbances in just their thought function and mental clarity or fog. And so the quality of life in general can often decline in those with higher weights, higher BMIs, so to speak, or excess weight or obesity. I want to just step back a little bit there in terms of when I talk about obesity, I'm talking about the medical condition. I'm not describing a person in any respect. And I utilize the term obesity as a medical diagnosis, much like someone with high blood pressure has hypertension. Somebody with diabetes, high blood sugar has diabetes. So somebody with excess weight, increased abdominal circumference, may have obesity depending on their BMI category.
That's what I wanted to connect also, that you mentioned a lot of really good things and you answered a lot of my questions that I had as far as the mental health and obesity, but a lot of people don't understand that, like you said, that if you have a history of anxiety or depression, you can have issues because a lot of that is connected to stress level and maybe lack of self-care and lifestyle issues. I do believe there's a direct connection between food and mood. And a lot of people don't understand how the lack of proper self-care and diet can increase your insulin level and cortisol. And then when your stress level is through the roof, you're going to have high cortisol levels. Can you talk a little bit about how people can balance that in their lives so that it's not causing these issues? How can they, obviously the mental health aspect of it is manage the stress, but can you talk about how they can balance their cortisol and insulin levels?
Oh, yes. So this is something that I discuss with my patients is managing stress, because if we're not managing, as you mentioned, your cortisol levels increase, that will just increase your blood sugars, and then that increases your insulin, which then sends the signal to your body to store fat. So doing good self-care, and it's all about just doing the best you can each day. So we are under so much pressures and stress every day. But I think, utilizing mindfulness techniques, perhaps some meditation or prayer, whatever works for them, getting enough sleep and eating the proper foods. We can tackle each one of those. Getting a balanced, healthy eating plan, trying to get as many whole plants, foods, so if we can go back to what Mother Nature provided for us, we're going to decrease our inflammation, and we're also going to improve our mood. Our gut microbiome does contribute to our mood. The microbiome is this gut flora, these different gut flora that live in our gut, that they send signals through the lining of our GI tract, our intestines, that actually through our mitochondria then send signals to our brain. And depending on the types of bacteria or gut flora that live there, there's certain ones that actually can send signals to your brain for cravings for sweets or carbs, because they are the ones that thrive in that environment. And there's others that are gonna thrive under more, healthier eating plan. And when you have more of those gut bacteria, you can also have less cravings. So the foods we want to eat are going to be coming from a variety of the rainbow that comes naturally from either the ground or Mother Earth, so increasing, the brighter the color, the better, and in a variety of ways. We also want to try to minimize the simple sugars and the processed foods. So we think of our both the sweets and the savory foods that are coming from refined grains or from sugar or high fructose corn syrup. Those are all very inflammatory, and they do interpret to increase cravings for more sugar. And then we're also just making sure you're getting enough balance of proteins and getting a variety of protein sources, and not being afraid of eating healthy fats. We've unfortunately seen an explosion in obesity, and I would say mental health disturbances following a low-fat diet. And what has ended up happening is that we are not really paying attention to how much sugar is going in. We want to be careful. We want to avoid the unhealthy fats. We want to avoid the trans and the saturated fats. But, the fats that come from plants naturally, so olives, olive oil, avocado oil, and to some degree, with some limitations, naturally occurring coconut oil. So having those and not being afraid to have them. And even if you're having the pasture-raised or organic milk with, or dairy sources are okay. Some people are sensitive to that, but trying to have that balanced eating and, not being restrictive with your diet. I think so many people go into this all or nothing mentality in regards to, I'm either on a diet or I'm off my diet and eating whatever I want. And really, we need to try to find the balance in between, because very rarely are you able to stick with a very strict diet. But if you're just trying to balance it out, so my simple tip for that is just when you start to eat something, or when you're planning or preparing something to eat, where is your protein coming from? Where are your vegetables or fruit? And those two simple things, because the carbs naturally come in, they're really easy to get, and we don't have to be afraid of carbs or avoid them. They're not a bad food source, but we just really in general aren't getting enough vegetables and protein. You can have plant-based proteins, you can have animal-based proteins, and, encourage a variety of those. So, there's a variety of diets that you can follow, but in general, I think trying to keep it simple and not worrying about it. I think sometimes people feel like they put themselves in this box and they have to follow the specific eating plan that can increase the worry and the anxiety over, am I doing the right thing? And so I think just taking a deep breath and just looking at it, where's my protein and where is my veggie? So, doing more of that and getting enough water in can help. Managing a moment, if we're worried or stressed about things, sometimes we may eat to help comfort ourselves from that stress, right? And so utilizing a mindfulness technique, taking a pause and taking a deep breath, maybe counting to 10 and asking yourself, why am I eating this, right? And recognizing, am I eating this to feel better, out of an emotion, out of a reaction to a situation? Maybe you just had a fight with a significant other or family member or a loved one, or somebody might have mistreated you. And, a lot of times growing up, we utilize food as a reward. We utilize food as a comfort. What do we do in general as society is, this amazing thing happened, let's go get some ice cream, or let's go celebrate, let's have a big meal. Or this terrible thing happened, oh my gosh, I'm going to eat some ice cream, or I'm going to have this meal, right? And so I think it's important to allow yourselves to enjoy the celebrations, and when these special occasions occur, to not feel guilty about them, but kind of recognizing that utilizing them as an everyday treatment for a condition isn't necessarily what they're intended for. So reserving that, while, sometimes they say, I really want this specific food, but utilizing, well, I'm going to save that, maybe utilize it as once a week or twice a week, that I'm going to have that treat. And is today the day that I want to use that or not? But a lot of my patients, we get to the point, chocolate is a common one. It sends those signals, you feel good, it releases those neurotransmitters, like, oh, this is delicious. And temporarily you do feel better, which is why comfort eating is hard to break the habit, because you get that neurotransmitter release, that dopamine release that improves your mood temporarily. But what happens is, later on, hours later, you're going to have that cascade of inflammation and that blood sugar and insulin rush. You're going to have a crash. You're going to feel more fatigued. You're not going to want to move. Maybe your gut will be feeling bloated. So all of these things, you're going to feel bad later on. And oftentimes people may feel guilty as well. And then that just perpetuates the cycle. One thing I also work on with people is talking to them about making a decision. You're going to have this, and owning it and not feeling bad about it. It's about, okay, you know what, on Christmas or on your special holiday, Thanksgiving, whatever it is, I'm going to have that pumpkin pie, or I'm going to have that special treat. And you're deciding to do that. And then it doesn't mean that your diet is ruined or your plan is off plan. It's just okay. And then the next day, it's not that special day or that special occasion, and I'm back onto my healthy eating routine. And I think you have to really work on our mindset and approach to food, and really evaluating your why. So, at the end of the day, sometimes reflecting, how did I do today with my eating? What did I struggle with, and what went well? And then how can I do better tomorrow? So many times we're doing, oh, whatever, I ate this one thing, so I'm totally off plan and I'm just going to eat whatever, and I'll start my diet on Monday. How many times that I'm going to start my diet on Monday, right? And I think we don't have to wait for Monday to come. What we just need to do is just work on, what can I do next? How can I do better next time? Or recognize, was there a certain situation that led to the struggle with your food choice? So a lot of times it's about planning or preparing. What are you going to have? And when you schedule that into your week, for a lot of people, maybe it's on a Sunday where you're going to meal plan for the busy work week or hectic week ahead. And those that are able to do that more consistently tend to have more success with their healthy eating plan. But, life was going to throw you challenges. And so you almost have to expect that. So what is a good backup plan? So yeah, ideally I'm going to make this delicious dish and my family's going to love it, or I'm going to enjoy it. Oh, but you know what? This came up, or that happened, or I didn't end up doing that, planning that week. So what's your backup? So it's always having, I just on a routinely basis shop for, I've got a variety of different vegetables that I know that my kids and my family will enjoy. And if you didn't really think about it, you can just have those in those, pre-cut carrots, those small carrots, or different veggies that are easy to have. So I'm always like, oh, we have some vegetable with our protein. Yeah, sorry, I went off on a tangent there. I have a lot of things to share. So,
and I know, and there's a lot to talk about when it comes to this, but two things that came up for me when you were talking about diets. Right now, the keto diet is really popular, and so is intermittent fasting. Can you tell us a little bit about each of those, and how effective are they for balancing insulin resistance and correcting the metabolic syndrome? And should we go in that route? Because I know these popular fad diets come on and everybody jumps on board, but then there's also some health risks to it. So can you talk about the pros and cons of it?
Yeah, so the ketogenic diet has been a latest, I would say, fad and craze, but it's been around for a while, and it is actually used. It is a treatment for children who have seizure disorders to help control and manage their seizures, to be in a ketogenic diet. What does a ketogenic diet mean, even, first of all, for those who may or may not know? We talk about ketosis, or then ketosis is when your body is utilizing fat for fuel. So you're burning off fat as your primary fuel source. Most of us are not in a ketogenic state. It's easier to use our glucose as our fuel source. So when we eat, our all of our nutrients go to our liver. Our liver processes it, and it breaks down our carbs, whether they come from a sweet carb or a salty carb or a natural vegetable carb. It's going to break that down. And it also will break down the proteins we have. It gets broken down in basically to the proteins that we need for our building blocks, but also into glucose eventually. And so glucose is our primary fuel source, but we can also run on fat as a fuel source. But you have to be really mindful and strict with following a really low carb diet. And that can be really difficult for people to do. It can also be risky for those who are on certain medications, and it can cause extreme. So somebody who may be on some either diabetes medications, and also, actually one of the medications we use to treat obesity should not be used with a ketogenic diet. But in general, it's a relatively healthy eating plan. And there's a lot of people that do enjoy it. And so I'm not against a ketogenic diet, but what can happen with it is that you go into, there's a transition period when you go from utilizing glucose as fuel to fat as fuel. And then there can be, this keto flu, as we call it, where you can feel tired, you can have headaches, you might feel lightheaded or dizzy, and so if you're not expecting that, that can be a problem. But then once you are in ketosis, so to speak, it's if you start to have foods that have a higher natural occurring blood, sugar levels or carb levels, then it's going to knock you out. So some people, what ends up happening is they'll live in there for a while, but then they'll go off and they'll go in and out. And so they kind of had those symptoms in and out of that keto state. It can also affect your hormones a little bit. And so there can be some struggles with that, but you don't have to follow a strict ketogenic diet to get into this, what we consider like a nutritional ketosis. So where you're kind of balancing in your burning fat and carbs as fuel. And so getting back to that intermittent fasting or time restricted eating, kind of going back to our evolutionary days of feast or famine, we didn't snack all the time when we evolved. So our body's actually used to going through periods of time of not eating. And one of the problems is right now is that we are snacking throughout the day. In the 50s and 60s, there was, you would have your 3 meals a day. There really wasn't snack. There wasn't a mid-morning snack. There wasn't a mid-afternoon snack. There wasn't a after-school snack or a sports snack. It was, you had your breakfast, you had your lunch, and you had your dinner, and that was pretty much it. And, fast forward to the 90s and beyond, where you have to eat 5 times a day. Well, some people might need to do that. There's going to be some individual variation, but for the most part, we don't have to. So in general, what I recommend is listening to your body. That's the most important thing. And if we're in, a lot of times when we interpret hunger cue, thirst cues as hunger cues. So we have to make sure we're drinking enough water, whether you're following a ketogenic diet, a low carb, high protein diet. And I didn't clarify the ketogenic diet. That's if you're having a low carbohydrate and high fat and kind of moderate protein. So you're minimizing the carbs. Some are really strict at like 25 grams of carbs per day or less, and not too many proteins, and then really balancing the rest with high fat. And one other thing I should clarify with that is that you can follow a ketogenic diet and burn fat as fuel from your body, from your fat stores, or you can follow a ketogenic diet and have a lot of fat in your diet, and you're eating so much fat that you're never really burning off the fat stores because you're taking in so much. So we have to really, modify and learn how to do what's right for your body. And if you're interested in a ketogenic diet, if you enjoy eating like that and you can stick to it long term, then that may be the right thing for you. But a lot of people will go into it thinking that it's going to help them lose weight. And then they go on it for a little while and just realize this is not for me. I can't keep doing it. And then they'll go off. And then that may be set another yo-yo cycle of weight gain. So we're really trying to minimize the yo-yo cycles of weight, because the more you do that, the harder it is to lose and maintain weight. So back to time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting, there's different ways to look at that. And so, and intermittent fasting can mean a variety of different things to different people. So we really first have to clarify, what do you mean by intermittent fasting? Or I like to use the word time-restricted eating. So if we think about our 24-hour day, a 24-hour clock, we all have the same amount of time. Studies have shown that if you limit, the start of your eating to the end of your eating, so whatever time of day you first start eating to the time of day when you're done eating, we would call that your eating window. And whenever you eat your last meal or eating event or snack for the day to when you start eating again the next day, that's your fasting window or non-eating window. And a lot of people right now, they feel they need to eat right away, or they're hungry right away. They're eating first thing in the morning. They're snacking throughout the day. And a lot of people are having midnight snacks, late night snacks, or they wake up hungry and have to go eat. There's a variety of reasons. So a lot of people are not having much time with a fasting window or non-eating window, but having a lot of their time with their eating window. What happens when we eat, as I mentioned, your blood sugars rise, your insulin levels rise, and then you store energy if you're not using it. What we do is we need to benefit from our body. Our body does thrive and need a period of time when it's not eating. I always say, if you're somebody who's used to eating throughout the day, really try to work on narrowing it down gradually. So if you're, say, eating from 6 a.m. till midnight, you're only having a fasting window of 6 hours. That means you're having 18 hours of where you're eating. Ideally trying to get to where you're at least having 12 and 12. So if you're starting at 6 a.m., maybe you're done by 6 p.m. But studies have shown that you can have a metabolic health benefit if you are limiting your eating time from to 10 hours and you're not in eating time to 14. And there can be even greater benefits if we're narrowing the eating window. And for some people, that's easy to do. And for others, that's really hard to do. So we have to listen to our body. But we can try to get to a point in time, people will call that a 14 and 10, where you're not eating for 14 hours and you are eating for 10 hours. That doesn't mean that for 10 hours straight, you're grazing all day long. And some of the studies that we have aren't that good in terms of they weren't really focusing on giving people advice on how to eat or what they were to eat or how many times a day to eat during those times. So some of the data is a little skewed, but there's current studies and underway that have more guidelines. So in general, if we're going to limit the amount of simple carbohydrates, so in avoiding the simple sugars, added sugars, or refined grains, and sticking to the more complex carbs when you're having them, and having those along in a balanced eating plan with healthy proteins and the healthy fats that come with them, then that's going to help. And then if you can really get to, either 3 meals a day and a snack if you need it, or 2 meals a day with a snack, everyone's going to vary in terms of what works for them. But when you get to the point where you're following a healthy eating plan and balanced eating plan, it's going to be easier to start to narrow or decrease the eating window. I like to start at least at 12 and 12 if you're beyond that to begin with. If you're already following a shorter eating window, 14 and 10 is my goal for everybody, but some people are able to do even shorter. And there are studies that show that our health benefits if you can limit to, say, a 16 and 8. So you have an 8-hour eating window. That's probably the easiest to follow, and you'll get even a little bit more benefit from the 14 and 10. There is metabolic health benefit for the 14 and 10. And then there's data to show that perhaps the 16, the 16 and 8 or the 18 and 6. Going beyond that, there may or may not be as much of a metabolic gain to restricting your eating windows shorter than 6 hours. But for some people, that's what works for them. Some people get to the point where they just have one meal a day, and they're having a very healthy, large meal. But what ends up happening is the more amount of time that you're not eating, the more time you spend in burning your energy stores. Studies also show that we want to mix it up because our bodies can adapt to the changes that we make. So, some people, we say maybe if we just start, that's where the individualized plans come into play. But for some people, getting to that 12, if you're not there yet, getting to the 14, if that's not difficult, and then adjusting. Maybe there's on weekdays, maybe it's just easier. If you're hungry in the morning, you should eat. But there's a lot of people who are not hungry in the morning, but they feel, because they've been told that they have to eat breakfast. I consider breakfast as when you break your fast, right? So whether or not that's 6 a.m., 9 a.m., or noon, that's going to vary from person to person. So, but have a plan. Like, what are you going to eat? Like, don't wait until you're starving to figure out what you're having. So the key is having a plan in place or a backup, and listening to your body and hydrating really well, but sticking with that. And then, allowing your body to utilize its energy stores. That's going to help a lot.
I know what you were saying is it doesn't matter what time you're breaking your fast. It's just important what you're eating. And a lot of people, whether they're intermittent fasting or not, starting off with a bowl of cereal or a muffin is definitely not the way to go, because that's also going to make you feel you're going to crave more sugar. You're going to be more lethargic, and it's going to affect your mood. So like you said, have a plan, have a good, healthy breakfast. And whenever that is, whether it's at 12 or it's at 6 in the morning, have a healthy breakfast, because that'll set the tone for the rest of your day. Well, this was really, really useful information. I benefited so much from it. Thank you so much for all the information. And just having this discussion, I think, is really important. A lot of people don't make that connection, and they think, well, what does my weight have to do with my mental health? But it's all connected. It's all affecting our body and our hormones and our brain chemicals and our gut bacteria. So where can people find you and follow you and learn more from you?
Oh, yes. Well, thank you for having me. And I'm always happy to help out. People can find me. My online program is Weight Loss Consults. So my website, weightlossconsults.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Weight Loss Consults, as also on Facebook, Weight Loss Consults. And I have, an easy to, your tips on how to manage your metabolism. So if anybody's interested in a free gift, weightlossconsults.com/free gift, and you can grab that so you can get your own tips where I provide you some support. And you can also sign up for my newsletter by doing that to get additional support to help you with your metabolism. But thank you for having me.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much. I mean, I can definitely want to have you back and maybe talk about food addictions and other aspects of weight loss and dieting, and just having a healthy mind and body, I guess, and just making sure our body's functioning as well as our mind, and it's all connected.
Yes, thank you for having me. And I'd be happy to come back, because there are a lot of topics that we didn't have time to get into that are related to our mental health and our weight, and how what we eat can affect our mood, how much sleep we're getting. It is all connected. And so we have to really look at it from this complex, comprehensive plan. So I'd be happy to come back.
Oh, definitely. I'd love to have you come back. So thank you again. And I really appreciate you being here. And we will share all of your links and information in the show notes for people that are interested. And we definitely will invite you back, because I think there's way more to talk about.
I agree. Thank you.